Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We often get great ideas from you, our amazing listeners, and this time is no different. Today we're tackling something I bet a lot of us have thought about, especially if you spend any time around kids in school. It's that connection between how well they can use language and how they, well, behave.
Yeah, how they get along with everyone and everything.
Exactly. It feels like something you see anecdotally all the time. A child is struggling to say what they mean, or maybe they can't quite follow instructions. And then sometimes that seems to come with some behavioral challenges too. It makes you wonder, is there a real link there?
Yeah, it really does make you wonder.
So you, our listener, actually pointed us towards some fascinating research on this, and we thought it was definitely worth a deep dive.
Oh, absolutely.
The researchers basically asked, is there a solid connection, like a statistically significant relationship, between a child's ability to use and understand language and any kind of behavioral issues they might be having in school? And they even took it a step further. They wanted to know, does this connection hold true for different kinds of kids, different ages, different backgrounds, and does it stay consistent over time as they grow up?
Fascinating questions.
Totally. So to get to the bottom of this, we're focusing on a particularly strong study, like a really robust piece of research. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis, which basically means they looked at a whole bunch of different studies, not just one.
Right. So they could get the big picture.
Exactly. It was done by Jason C. Chow and Joseph H. Wiebe back in 2018, and it was published in a journal called Educational Psychology Review, so it's definitely well respected in the field.
For sure.
So our goal today is to unpack this meta-analysis for you. We want to break down the main things they discovered about this language-behavior connection, but also, crucially, we want to explore why it matters. Like, why should we care about this relationship? What does it mean for how kids learn and grow socially?
Right. So how does this actually impact their lives?
Okay, so let's get into it. It's a pretty common observation that language issues and behavioral issues in kids, they often kind of show up together. It's not exactly groundbreaking news, right?
No, not really. This study actually points out that researchers have been talking about this overlap for quite a while now.
Right.
And they highlight some pretty striking stats, to kind of back that up.
Oh, yeah, tell me about that.
So they say that a huge percentage, like somewhere between 68 and 97%, of students who've been diagnosed with what's called EBD, that stands for emotional and behavioral disorders, they also have what clinicians would consider a diagnosable language difficulty.
Wow, that is a massive overlap.
It is.
But it's also kind of, I don't know, almost like a hidden problem because they also mentioned another study, a meta-analysis actually, that found something like 81% of students with EBD, they had language difficulties that hadn't even been formally identified.
Yeah.
So these are kids who are getting support, maybe, for their behavior. But a really crucial piece of the puzzle, this underlying language challenge, could be completely missed.
That's a really good point.
And it makes you think, imagine how much more effective those interventions could be if we tackled both the language piece and the behavior piece.
Absolutely. You have to address the root of the problem, right?
Yeah. And here's the thing. This connection seems to go both ways.
Oh, how so?
Well, the researchers pointed out that kids who have what's called specific language impairment, or SLI, so that means they have trouble with language, but it's not because of any other developmental condition.
Right.
They're also much more likely to have behavior problems later on, like as they go through school.
Yeah.
So it's not just that behavioral issues are overshadowing language issues or vice versa. It seems more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-way street.
Not at all. And get this, it's not even just about kids with formal diagnoses either. This pattern, this connection, seems to show up in other groups too.
Yeah.
They mention studies of young people who are, well, they're involved in the justice system.
Oh, interesting.
And in that group, researchers found a lot of difficulties with understanding language, which is called receptive language deficits.
Huh. So being able to process what someone is saying to you, that makes sense, actually.
Yeah, it really highlights how essential it is to understand what's being said to you,
Yeah.
both in school and just in life generally.
Oh, absolutely. And the study points out that these young people who are in, correctional settings, they often have similar histories of behavior problems in school as students with EBD.
So again, it's pointing to that underlying link.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing we should clarify is that when we talk about problem behavior in this context, like both in this research and in our discussion today, it's a very broad term.
Yeah, good point.
It covers a whole bunch of difficulties that kids might have in school. It's not just one specific thing.
All right, so we see this connection, this link between language and behavior, but the million-dollar question is, why? What's going on underneath the surface,
Yeah, what's the mechanism?
right? What's driving this connection? And the researchers admit that the exact direction of this relationship, like which one comes first, is still kind of blurry.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They bring up some earlier work by a researcher named Hinshaw from back in 1992, who suggested a few possible explanations. One is that basically language difficulties might actually lead to behavior problems.
Okay.
Another is that maybe it's the other way around. Maybe behavioral issues are somehow getting in the way of kids developing their language skills normally.
Hmm.
And then there's the idea that it could be a two-way street, a reciprocal relationship where they're both influencing each other.
Oh, that makes sense.
And lastly, there's always the possibility that something else entirely is going on, that there's some other hidden factors that are contributing to both the language challenges and the behavioral challenges.
Right, like some other underlying cause.
Exactly. It's a bit like trying to solve a really complex puzzle and you're missing a few pieces.
I can see that.
But this study, it tries to give us a framework, way to think about this whole thing more systematically.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
So they suggest that language is like the foundation for everything.
Right.
It's the basis for being able to learn academic subjects, and it's also how we navigate social interactions.
Right.
So if a child has weaker language skills, that can have a domino effect. It can negatively impact how well they do in school, how they get along with their peers, and how they interact with their teachers.
Mm.
And those two things, their academic success and their social behavior, they then start to influence each other. And ultimately how a child does in those areas, it can have really long-term consequences for their life.
Yeah, for sure. It's all interconnected.
Totally.
And this makes so much sense when you think about the classroom environment, right? Like, language is the main tool for teaching and learning. Kids need to be able to understand what their teacher is saying, whether it's during a lesson or if they're reading instructions.
Right.
And then on the flip side, they have to be able to show what they've learned, whether it's through speaking or writing. There's a lot of demand on their language abilities constantly throughout the day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's easy to forget how much language is involved in just about everything we do in school.
Oh, totally. And this study brought up a really interesting point about, like, the idea of correct English in the classroom. They talk about this distinction between, get this, prescriptive grammar, which is basically the set of rules that some people believe language should follow. And then there's descriptive grammar, which is how people actually use language in real life, in everyday conversations.
Oh, right. So like the way we actually talk versus the way some grammar books say we should talk.
Exactly. And these two things can be pretty different. Oh, for sure. Like, think about all the slang and informal language we use that would never fly in a formal essay, right?
Totally. So child might be communicating really well with their family and friends using language that's totally natural to them, but might be considered incorrect according to these strict grammar rules that are often taught in school.
Hmm.
And then they go to school, and suddenly those familiar language patterns are seen as wrong, or not good enough.
Yeah, I can see how that would be confusing for a kid.
Oh, for sure. And the researchers even cited some other research by Harmon and Watson from 2012 that suggests this potential mismatch, this conflict between a child's natural way of speaking and the expectations of the classroom. It can actually be a source of frustration. Like it could even be a trigger for some of those problem behaviors if the child feels like they're constantly being misunderstood or corrected for using language that's totally normal to them.
It's like they're being told that the way they naturally communicate is wrong.
Right.
And that can't feel good.
Not at all. That feeling of not being able to truly express yourself
Yeah.
or understand what's being asked of you, I can absolutely see how that could lead to a child acting out in some way.
For sure. It's a way to cope.
Yeah. And the study also looked at the dynamic between students and teachers, which is super interesting.
Oh, what did they find there?
They talked about these negative interactions that can happen between students and teachers, and they drew on something called Patterson and Reed's coercive interaction model.
Okay. What's that all about?
So basically, the idea is that if a student is having trouble communicating, like maybe they can't understand the instructions or they can't explain what they need, it can lead to these patterns of negative reinforcement.
Uh-oh. Negative reinforcement, that sounds bad.
Yeah, it's not great. It's basically a cycle where, without meaning to, both the student and the teacher end up getting rewarded for behaviors that actually make things worse in the long run.
Oh, how so?
So imagine a student is acting out in class because they just don't get what they're supposed to be doing. The teacher, who's feeling stressed and wants to calm things down quickly, might simplify the task a lot or even just say, you know what, you don't have to do it.
Right.
So in that moment, the students acting out has actually helped them avoid something they found really difficult.
Hmm.
And that can reinforce that behavior. It teaches them that acting out is a way to get out of challenging situations.
Yeah, I can see that. And what about the teacher?
Well, the teacher feels relief because the disruption stopped,
Right.
right? So in a way, they're also getting reinforced in that moment. But the root of the problem, the communication issue that started the whole thing, hasn't been addressed.
It's a temporary fix that doesn't really solve anything.
Exactly. And the study even suggests that sometimes instruction that's really complex, like uses a lot of advanced language, it can actually be something that students with language problems actively try to avoid.
Hmm.
Think about it. If you're constantly being exposed to language that you just can't fully process,
Hmm.
you might start to develop strategies to get out of those situations.
Yeah, like maybe pretending you need to go to the bathroom or something.
Exactly. And then, because that avoidance behavior helps you escape the academic demand, it gets reinforced. The study authors even bring up another meta-analysis by Titsworth and some other researchers published in 2015 that look at how important it is for teachers to be clear in their instructions.
Oh, interesting.
And their findings basically show that when teachers communicate clearly, it makes a big difference in how well students learn.
So it's not just about what's being said, but how it's being said.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it starts to show you how interconnected all of this is, right? Like, if you're having a tough time with language, you're more likely to have trouble understanding what people are asking you to do, which can lead to frustration, which can lead to acting out, which can lead to avoiding those challenging situations.
Right, it's a chain reaction.
It is.
Yeah.
And then to add another layer, the study pointed out that teachers, without even realizing it, might end up spending less time directly teaching students who are showing more of these problem behaviors.
Mm.
There's some research by Wiebe and his team from 2003 that estimated that teachers working with kids who have significant behavior problems, they might only be spending about 30% of their time with those students on actual academic instruction.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah. And then you combine that with findings from another study by Scott and colleagues in 2011, which showed that these same students are often less engaged with their schoolwork. It's kind of a recipe for them falling behind.
Right, they're missing out on both the time and the engagement needed to really learn.
Exactly. So it really seems like low language skills, poor academic achievement, and problem behavior are all tied together pretty tightly.
It's a complex web, for sure.
It really is.
Ah.
Okay, so we've looked at this established link between language and behavior and some possible explanations for why it exists. But now let's get to the heart of our deep dive today, which is looking at the actual findings of this big meta-analysis by Chow and Wiebe.
Okay, let's do it.
What did they find when they looked at all that data from all those different studies?
So their main goal was to use all that data to get a clearer understanding of just how strong the relationship is between language skills and problem behavior. And they wanted to do it across a really wide range of kids, not just focusing on specific groups.
Right, like to see if this connection was something more universal.
Exactly.
And drum roll, please. What did they find? Was there a clear connection?
Yes, there was.
Tell me everything.
They found a statistically significant negative correlation between a child's ability with language and any problem behaviors they were showing. The specific number they reported was a z-value of negative 0.17. And they said the range of possible values, taking into account all the different studies they looked at, was between negative 0.21 and negative 0.13.
Okay, that's great, but I know our listeners might not be statisticians.
Fair.
So let's break that down a little. A negative correlation just means that as one thing goes up, the other tends to go down.
Right.
So in this case, what they're saying is that children with weaker language skills tend to show more problem behaviors at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a real measurable connection. But they also looked at another really interesting question.
What was that?
They wanted to know if a child's language abilities early on could actually predict their behavior later, like down the road.
Oh, that's a fascinating idea. So, if you know a child's language skills at one point in time, can you get a sense of whether they might have behavior challenges in the future?
Exactly. And guess what? They found another significant correlation, but this time a predictive one, meaning it looked at how language predicted later behavior. And get this, it was the same z-value as before, negative 0.17, with a similar range of negative 0.21 to negative 0.13.
Wow.
So what this is telling us is that if a child has lower language skills at one point in their development, it's associated with a higher chance of them having more behavior problems later on.
Hmm. That's really important to know.
It is. The study mentioned that the average time between those two measurements, the language one and the behavior one, in these predictive studies, it was about 3 years.
So it's not just a fleeting thing.
Right. This connection seems to hold up over a significant period of time. But here's something else that's really important. Those significant correlations, they were consistent across different age groups of kids in the studies, across different time periods when the research was done, and it didn't matter what the kid's initial risk status was.
What do you mean by risk status?
So whether they were developing typically, or they were considered to be at risk for some reason, or they had already been identified with some kind of disability, like a learning disability or a speech or language impairment.
Oh, I see.
And their analysis didn't find that age or risk status really changed the strength of this connection.
So this link between language and behavior, it seems pretty fundamental, no matter who the child is or what their background is.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway. But they didn't just stop there. They dug a little deeper. They did some more focused analyses where they looked at receptive language, which is how well a child understands language, versus expressive language, which is how well they can actually use language to communicate.
Oh, that's interesting. So they were trying to tease apart whether one type of language skill was more strongly connected to behavior than the other.
Exactly.
And what did they find?
Well, both receptive language and expressive language skills, they both had those significant negative correlations with behavior problems. But here's the interesting part. The strength of that connection didn't seem to be much different between those two types of language.
Huh.
It seems like both understanding language and being able to use it, they both play a role in a child's behavior.
That makes sense.
And they did another cool analysis where they looked at different types of behavior problems, like internalizing behaviors, which are things like anxiety or withdrawal, versus externalizing behaviors, which are more like aggression or acting out.
Okay. So did those different types of behavior relate to language differently?
That's what they wanted to know. And their analysis found that both internalizing behaviors and externalizing behaviors, they both had significant negative correlations with language ability. And again, they didn't find much difference in how strongly language was linked to those two different categories of behavior.
So it's not just those, obvious disruptive behaviors that are connected to language. Even those quieter, more internal struggles seem to be linked to how well a child can understand and use language.
Absolutely.
That really broadens our understanding of how important language is for kids' overall well-being, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, one last thing. To make sure their results weren't skewed by something called publication bias, which is basically the tendency for studies that find significant results to be more likely to get published.
Oh, right. So it could make it look like there's a stronger relationship than there really is.
Exactly. So to check for that, they did some analyses, and those analyses basically said that the findings of this meta-analysis are pretty robust.
Good to know.
Yeah, it means we can be more confident in the conclusions they've drawn. Okay. Phew, we've covered a lot of ground. But what do you think our listeners should really take away from all of this? Like, what are the main points to keep in mind as we go back out into the world and interact with kids?
Well, one big takeaway is that this connection, this link between language and behavior, it's not just something you see in kids who've already been identified as having specific language or behavioral problems. It seems to be relevant for all kids in any classroom.
That's a good point.
So even those subtle, maybe easily missed language difficulties in kids who seem to be developing typically, they could still be playing a role in behavioral issues.
Right. Like, we might be attributing a behavior to something else, but maybe underneath there's a language component that we're not seeing.
Exactly. And I think this study really makes a case for thinking differently about behavior. Like, instead of just labeling a behavior as bad or disruptive, we should consider the possibility that it's actually the child's way of communicating an unmet need. Maybe they're having trouble understanding, or maybe they just can't express what they need or what they're feeling.
So it's almost like we need to shift our perspective and see behavior, especially challenging behavior, as a form of communication.
I think so. And this isn't just important for little kids or kids with really obvious disabilities, but potentially for all students, especially those who are struggling in school or having a tough time socially.
Really gets you thinking, huh?
Yeah.
Now, in fairness, the researchers do acknowledge that their study has some limitations.
Oh, right. Like what?
Well, to measure language and behavior,
Yeah.
they relied on standardized tests.
Okay.
And those tests, they can be helpful, but they don't always capture the full picture of how a child uses language in their everyday life.
Right, or all the nuances of their behavior.
Exactly. And the studies they looked at tended to focus more on those really obvious externalizing behaviors, like the acting out kind of stuff.
Mm.
And one really important point, this was a correlational study. So it shows us there's a relationship, but it doesn't prove that one thing directly causes the other.
Right.
There could be other factors involved, like a child's socioeconomic background, that this meta-analysis didn't fully address.
Good point.
So just because we see a connection, it doesn't mean it's a simple cause and effect situation.
It's more complicated than that. But even with those limitations, finding this consistent pattern across so many different studies is still a pretty big deal.
It is. And speaking of future research, what do the authors suggest we should be looking into next?
Well, they highlight a few key areas.
Okay.
One is to really drill down into the specifics of those connections between different parts of language, like vocabulary, grammar, and even things like narrative skills, the ability to tell stories, and then see how those different language skills relate to different types of behavioral challenges.
So like a more fine-grained analysis.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing they suggest is to compare findings using different ways of measuring language and behavior. Like maybe some methods capture those real-life nuances better than others.
Right.
And probably the most important area for future research is to test out different intervention strategies.
Oh, yeah, like what actually works to help these kids.
Right, and that could include interventions that specifically target a child's language skills, but also strategies to help teachers make their instruction clearer, more accessible to all learners.
So it's about supporting both the child and the environment they're learning in.
Exactly.
It really makes you think that maybe by addressing these underlying language difficulties, we might see improvements in behavior
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Yeah,
Like we could create a more supportive, positive learning environment for everyone.
absolutely.
All right, so to sum it all up for you, our listener, the main takeaway from this deep dive into Chow and Weeby's research is that there's a really strong link between a child's ability with language and any behavior problems they might be having in school.
Right. And that connection is there whether we're looking at language and behavior at the same time or whether we're trying to predict future behavior based on early language skills.
Exactly. And this relationship seems to hold up across all kinds of kids, not just those who've already been diagnosed with something.
This really highlights just how crucial language skills are for kids' overall development, both socially and behaviorally.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a question to think about. Given all we've talked about today, what are some of the ways, maybe subtle ways, that communication breakdowns might be contributing to the behavioral challenges you see in your own lives?
Yeah.
And what are some small things you could do differently, maybe in how you think about behavior or how you interact with kids, that might help address those underlying communication needs?
It's definitely something to ponder.
It is. And if you're really intrigued by this topic, we encourage you to check out the original study by Chow and Weeby, or explore some of the other research in this area.
There's so much to learn.
There really is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those brains buzzing. Until next time.